Before we begin, if you're new here, welcome to True Echo, where real emotion meets powerful storytelling. The following story will shock you, inspire you, and maybe even change the way you see the world. So sit back, listen closely, and remember, what you do with power says everything about who you are. Tasha Miller never imagined her Tuesday shift would change her life, or anyone else's. At 25, she'd seen enough to know that the wealthiest people often hid behind walls of privilege, suspicion, and silence. But Richard Bennett was different. Or so she thought. Towering over the Manhattan skyline, his penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, modern art on the walls, silence in the halls, and tension in the air. Tasha had worked here every Tuesday and Thursday for over 3 years. She knew the routine like clockwork. Clean the kitchen first, then living room, then bathrooms, then finally the master suite, always last, always untouched unless explicitly permitted. But that day, as she bent to tie the garbage liner in the kitchen, a sudden voice snapped through the room like ice cracking underfoot. "Tasha, what did you do with my Rolex?" She froze, slowly straightening, heart thudding. "Excuse me?" "My Rolex," Richard said, stepping into view, his designer shirt crisp, his hair slicked, and his eyes burning with contempt. "The Submariner. $50,000. I wore it last night. It was on my dresser this morning. Now it's gone." Tasha swallowed hard, barely able to believe the words she was hearing. "Mr. Bennett. I never touched anything in your bedroom. I cleaned the floors. That's it." Richard took 2 steps forward, looming like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. "Don't insult my intelligence. You were the only one in that room today." The accusation cut deeper than the words. It was the implication behind them. That her word, her integrity, meant nothing because of who she was and what she looked like. She'd worked too hard, survived too much to be accused like this. "If you want to check my bag," she said, voice trembling but steady, "go ahead. I have nothing to hide." He pulled out his phone. "Oh, I'll do more than that. I'm calling the police." "You think I won't? I've had enough of people like you abusing trust." Tasha's spine straightened. "Then call them," she said. "I'm not afraid of the truth." The air crackled with confrontation, but before Richard could respond, a cry pierced the tension. A baby's cry. Distant, sharp, then louder, like a siren calling for help. "Tyler." Tasha turned instinctively. Richard didn't even flinch. "He's been crying for a while," she said. "Is he okay?" Richard waved her off. "That's not your concern. His nanny will handle it." But the cries intensified. Not just hunger or discomfort, this was a cry of desperation. Tasha's maternal instinct surged. She dropped the cleaning cloth and ran down the hall. "Hey!" Richard shouted. "Where do you think you're going? I didn't give you permission." She didn't stop. The nursery door was half closed. She pushed it open and gasped. Tyler lay red-faced in the crib, soaked diaper, empty bottle, and not a single soul around. "Oh, sweet boy," she whispered, scooping him up. And then, like a miracle, he stopped crying. His tiny fingers clutched her shirt. His body relaxed. Tasha blinked away tears. She cleaned him gently, replaced his diaper, held him close. In just minutes, the shrieking child had calmed into soft breathing. That's when Richard burst in. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Put my son down." Tasha turned slowly, baby in her arms, eyes fierce and fearless now. "Mr. Bennett, someone left your son crying in filth for God knows how long. And you were about to call the police on an innocent person. What do you think this says about you?" Richard froze in place, eyes bouncing between the child, peaceful in her arms, and her steady, unshaken stare. He opened his mouth but no words came out. She'd told him the truth. And he knew it. Richard Bennett had always believed himself immune to judgment. In the boardroom, in the media, in his own penthouse, he was king. But right now, he stood utterly dethroned in his son's nursery, staring at the most unlikely person to strip away his power, Tasha Miller, a woman he hadn't thought twice about before accusing her of theft. She held Tyler with gentle precision, swaying slightly on her heels as if she'd done this 1,000 times. Tyler's little chest rose and fell calmly, his eyelids fluttering like the drama of the past hour had never happened. And that's what got to Richard. His own son, always fussy, always inconsolable, was perfectly at peace. In a stranger's arms. Richard stepped forward with a flicker of possessiveness. "Give him to me." Tasha hesitated, then slowly passed the baby over. Tyler's face scrunched immediately. 1 second passed. Then 2. The scream came fast and violent. Tyler kicked, wailed, turned red with rage, his whole body rejecting Richard's touch like fire to ice. The cries echoed through the penthouse. Richard awkwardly patted his back, holding his son like a foreign object. He looked up at Tasha, frustration burning behind his eyes. "What did you do to him?" "I held him like someone who cared," she said quietly. Richard's nostrils flared. "Don't get sanctimonious with me." "I'm not," she replied. "But if you want to call the police, I suggest you do it now. Before your son wears himself out again." She stepped forward and took Tyler back. Instantly, his cries softened. Richard watched in disbelief as the little boy snuggled against her shoulder, content again. That moment cracked something inside Richard, something deeply buried beneath his designer suits and 7-figure stock portfolio. A voice inside him, one he'd ignored for years, whispered, "This is your fault." But his pride fought back. "You were still in my room. You could have taken the watch." "And yet," Tasha said gently, "I didn't. You can search my things. You can check the cameras. But ask yourself this, what made you believe I stole from you in the first place? Was it anything I did, or just the assumptions you carry?" He blinked. "I told you," she continued, "I didn't steal from you. But now you've done something far worse, you've shown your son what not to become." The words were soft, but they landed like punches. Richard's jaw tightened. His mind scrambled for something to hold on to, some way to reassert dominance. He was Richard Bennett. Men didn't talk to him like this, let alone a cleaning lady. But he couldn't ignore the truth, Tasha hadn't just embarrassed him. She'd exposed him. He turned away abruptly, pacing toward the living room. "Fine," he snapped. "You want the cameras? Let's check them." "Gladly," Tasha replied, still rocking Tyler gently. Minutes later, the two stood with the building's security supervisor in front of a flat-screen monitor. The grainy black and white footage rolled back through the night. Richard leaned in. There he was, stumbling out of his Bentley in the garage around 11:43 p.m. He paused, fumbled with something in his pocket. And then, clear as day, his Rolex slipped from his coat and bounced beneath the car. He didn't notice. Walked right past it. No one else appeared on the screen after him. Silence. The security guard cleared his throat and looked away, uncomfortable. Tasha remained perfectly still. Richard exhaled, slowly. "Well," he muttered, "there it is." Tasha turned to face him. "You accused me. Threatened me. In front of your child." His voice dropped to a bitter grumble. "I'll apologize." "Not to me," she said, and walked out. Back in the elevator, Tyler asleep against her, Tasha felt no triumph, only a deep, aching disappointment. She had seen behind the curtain. Richard Bennett wasn't just arrogant. He was broken. Hollowed out by his own image. And worst of all, too afraid to admit it. But this story was far from over. Because while Richard may have backed down for now, the bruised pride of a man like him didn't fade quietly. And Tasha knew, when people like Richard were embarrassed, they didn't retreat. They retaliated. And sure enough, by the time she reached the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her agency. Immediate suspension pending investigation. Mr. Bennett filed a formal complaint of misconduct. Do not return to the property. Tasha stared at the screen, then at the quiet child in her arms. The war had just begun. Tasha stood on the edge of the sidewalk, the city humming around her, but her world felt still. Tyler slept peacefully in her arms, unaware that she was now officially suspended, her name tarnished by a man who couldn't bear the sting of being wrong. She gently shifted him and looked up at the towering building she had just exited. Somewhere in that penthouse, Richard Bennett was spinning a narrative, already moving to crush her before his shame could reach the public. That's what men like him did. Not just deny the truth, but destroy anyone who threatened it. She returned Tyler to the doorman inside and gave a calm, professional explanation to the nanny who'd finally reappeared. Then she stepped out into the sunlight once more and started walking, not aimlessly, but with a fire in her chest that guided her next move. Tasha hadn't just been falsely accused. She'd been marked. And she had no intention of staying silent. Back at her small studio in Harlem, Tasha opened a drawer beneath her bed and pulled out an old black binder. She hadn't touched it in years, but everything inside was still organized with military precision: her credentials, copies of her criminology degrees, forensic psychology notes, and a list of trusted contacts she hadn't used since leaving Atlanta. She flipped to the last page, picked up her phone, and dialed. Martinez, came the voice on the other end. Firm. Familiar. It's Tasha, she said, her voice steady despite everything. I need your help. There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. Still cleaning apartments to finish school? Yeah. And I just got suspended. A millionaire accused me of stealing his Rolex. But I've got footage clearing me, and more than that, his baby was left alone, neglected, while he tried to ruin my life. Martinez was silent for a beat. What do you want to do? Dig, Tasha said. Hard. I want everything on Richard Bennett, lawsuits, discrimination complaints, NDAs, any settlements he's tried to hide. You're not just cleaning anymore, are you? Not today, she said. By that evening, Martinez had already sent her a preliminary file. Richard Bennett had a long history of unethical behavior buried under years of legal maneuvers, former employees paid off after hostile accusations, whispers of racism at his hedge fund, and even a nanny who had mysteriously disappeared mid-contract, never to speak publicly again. But now Tasha had something those others hadn't: timing, receipts, and a story that involved a baby crying alone in a room, while a powerful man falsely accused an innocent woman. And this time, there were cameras. This time, the truth had a voice. She emailed the evidence to Patricia Wilson, a civil rights attorney she'd admired for years. Then she attached her own formal complaint, complete with time stamps, video files, and audio clips she'd secretly recorded, something she'd started doing after a different wealthy client made inappropriate comments 6 months prior. Less than 24 hours later, Tasha found herself in Wilson's law office across from Bryant Park. Patricia, poised and composed, tapped the USB stick thoughtfully. I've seen a lot of racial bias claims, Tasha, she said, but this is different. You didn't just survive this man's abuse. You turned the mirror on him, and you've got proof. Tasha nodded. It's not just about me. If he gets away with this, he'll do it again. Maybe next time it's a nanny, or another black girl just trying to get through the day. Wilson leaned forward. Then let's not give him that chance. That afternoon, the press got wind of the story. A tip was sent anonymously to a respected investigative journalist at the New York Gazette. Within hours, headlines were flying across social media: Millionaire accuses Maid, then surveillance video exposes the truth. The article featured stills from the garage camera, a summary of Tasha's credentials, and quotes from unnamed sources about Richard's pattern of abuse. Inside his penthouse, Richard stared at the screen in disbelief. His face pale, his fingers twitching, he grabbed his phone. "This is libel," he spat into the receiver to his lawyer. "We need to sue. Immediately." But his lawyer sighed on the other end. "Richard, they have video. It's not libel if it's true." Richard stood, heart pounding. "Then destroy her. We leak her background. Tell the press she's not a real cleaner. Say she infiltrated my home. Say anything." His lawyer hesitated. "Careful. She's got legal counsel now. Patricia Wilson. You go after her, it'll only get worse." "Worse?" Richard hissed. "This is already a disaster." But he didn't know it yet. This wasn't the disaster. The disaster was still coming. Because while Richard scrambled to contain the fallout, more women were coming forward. 2 former assistants. 1 nanny. A former junior analyst at his hedge fund. All with similar stories. All silenced. Until now. Tasha hadn't just exposed him. She'd started a movement. The headlines spread like wildfire. By the next morning, Richard Bennett's name trended on every major platform. What began as a single accusation against Tasha Miller had unraveled into a public reckoning. The footage of him dropping his own Rolex while drunk, combined with his hostile outburst toward Tasha, had been damning enough. But it was the pattern that emerged, the same accusation hurled at women of color, the same veiled threats, the NDAs, that turned the story into a national outrage. News anchors dissected the footage on morning television, experts debated the implications of his behavior on legal panels, and activists called for a full investigation into Bennett's business practices. But it was the raw, unfiltered audio clip, Tasha's recording from that nursery, that sent shockwaves through the public. "You people are always trying to get ahead off someone else's back. You really think I'd believe you over my instincts?" That one line, cut with the soft cries of baby Tyler in the background, had more impact than any article ever could. It was played, replayed, and shared millions of times. Tasha had never intended to be a public figure. But now, the world knew her name. Still, in the eye of the storm, Tasha remained calm. She declined early interviews. Let the facts do the talking. Let the lawyers do the groundwork. Her face only appeared publicly for the first time in a New York Times profile, where she was quoted simply. "Dignity is not something anyone has the right to take from you, not a boss, not a billionaire, no one. I stood my ground because I knew the truth." Back at his crumbling empire, Richard Bennett was unraveling. The damage control strategy he'd always leaned on, throwing money at the problem, intimidating the weaker party, spinning the narrative, was failing at every turn. The more he tried to discredit Tasha, the more her calm, confident composure stood in contrast to his volatility. His company's board convened in emergency session. Margaret Langston, the board chair, stood at the head of the mahogany table as the directors filed in. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Richard's name is now toxic," she said. "Our largest clients are threatening to pull contracts. We've received inquiries from federal labor investigators. If we don't act immediately, there won't be a firm left to protect." The vote to suspend Richard Bennett as CEO was unanimous. By noon, he was escorted out of his own headquarters. Reporters swarmed him on the steps. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Bennett, any comment on the security footage? Are you stepping down voluntarily? Do you deny the racial bias allegations?" He kept his head down, jaw tight. No comment. Across the city, Tasha was finally stepping into a space she had long dreamed of but never thought she'd reach this way, the executive offices of Chase and Associates, one of the nation's most powerful investigative firms. Jonathan Chase himself had reached out after watching her press conference, his voice a blend of admiration and intent. "Ms. Miller, he said as she entered the room, "You've done what few people can. You faced a man with all the power, all the resources, and didn't flinch. We could use someone like you." Tasha looked around at the sleek, glass-walled offices, so different from the janitorial closets she used to clock out of, and nodded slowly. "I'm ready." Jonathan offered her the role of senior investigator on the spot. By the time she signed the offer, her inbox was already filled with messages from women thanking her, from law professors asking her to guest lecture, from foundations offering support. But one message stood out, a short, simple email from a name she hadn't expected. Victoria Bennett. "Ms. Miller. I saw the footage. I'm not reaching out to apologize on my husband's behalf, I've long stopped defending him. But I want to thank you. Tyler deserved better. And now, because of you, he might get it. Victoria." Tasha read the note twice, her heart tightening a little. She didn't reply. Not yet. She had more important things to do. Because this wasn't just about Richard anymore. This was about changing a system that had let men like him hide behind glass towers and golden silence for far too long. And Tasha Miller, once a girl scrubbing marble floors, was now standing in front of rooms full of lawyers and activists and strategists, leading the charge. And Richard? Richard was sitting alone in a luxury apartment he could no longer afford, scrolling through endless articles about his own fall from grace, while emails from lawyers, investors, and even his wife flooded in, each one a nail in the coffin of his empire. But the final blow, that hadn't arrived yet. Not until the letter. Not until the one person he never expected to hear from decided to speak. Richard Bennett sat motionless in the dim glow of his now half-empty penthouse. What was once a pristine, cold display of wealth now felt like a tomb. The silence was no longer peace, it was punishment. Days had passed since his world began crumbling. The media frenzy, the board vote, his wife's departure, it had all spun out like a train derailment he could neither stop nor reverse. He had tried everything. Spoke to PR teams. Threatened lawsuits. Tried to buy silence. But the world had stopped listening. The power he'd once wielded so easily had turned into dust in his hands. And now, sitting at the edge of his leather sofa with a bottle of untouched scotch beside him, he stared at an envelope that had been slid under his door an hour ago. It had no return address. Just his name. Neat, handwritten cursive. He ripped it open, expecting another demand letter from a lawyer. But inside was a handwritten note. From Tyler. The words were clearly dictated and written by a schoolteacher or guardian, but the message was unmistakably from his son. Dear Dad. I know people are mad at you. I heard what happened at school. They said you were mean to Miss Tasha. Miss Tasha is nice. She held me when I cried. I wish you didn't yell at her. She made me feel safe. I still love you. But I want you to be better. Tyler. Richard dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor like a feather made of lead. His own son, his legacy, was holding a mirror up to him. Not with rage. Not with disgust. But with innocence. With disappointment. And somehow, that was infinitely worse. The letter undid him more than the headlines ever could. Because for the first time, Richard didn't see himself in control. He saw himself through the eyes of a child, cold, distant, cruel. And no money could erase that image. Across town, Tasha sat in the conference room of Chase and Associates, briefing her team on a new discrimination case involving a high-profile tech firm. The energy was electric, the purpose clear. They weren't just investigating anymore, they were rebuilding trust in broken systems. After the meeting, she stepped into her office and noticed an envelope on her desk. It was from Patricia Wilson. Inside, a typed letter and a check, a settlement offer from Richard Bennett. The amount was staggering. 7 figures. Tax-free. No NDA required. But it wasn't the money that caught her eye. It was the handwritten note tucked behind the check. Miss Miller. There are no words I can say that will undo what I've done. I was wrong. And not just about the Rolex. I was wrong about everything. I see now that you were never my enemy. You were my mirror. And I hated what I saw. Thank you, for showing me that truth has a cost. I am paying it, and I deserve to. Richard Bennett. Tasha closed her eyes and let out a slow, steady breath. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt resolved. He had tried to break her. But in doing so, he had broken open a wound he could no longer ignore. And now, she had a choice. She could take the money and walk away. Or she could use it, to build, to grow, to lift others like her who had been silenced for too long. She reached for her phone and called Patricia. Let's take the check, she said. But not for me. Then for who? Patricia asked. For the foundation, Tasha replied. We're starting it today. And so began the birth of Rise Above, a legal and advocacy group dedicated to protecting workers from racial discrimination, retaliation, and wrongful accusations. With her settlement as seed money and the support of civil rights leaders, it quickly blossomed into a national movement. While Richard faded from the headlines, Tasha became the face of justice, quiet, strong, relentless. And in every case she took, every young black woman she mentored, every courtroom she stood in, she carried Tyler's face in her mind. Because one child had reminded her that every fight for dignity starts with telling the truth. Even when the world refuses to believe you. Especially then. The first few months after founding Rise Above were a whirlwind. Tasha found herself moving at a speed she'd never known, interview requests, media appearances, pro bono consultations, donor meetings, and strategy sessions with attorneys and human rights experts from across the country. She hadn't just built an organization, she'd ignited a movement. Rise Above wasn't just a charity. It was a shield. And it was quickly becoming a sword. Victims of discrimination who had once felt voiceless now had a champion. Single mothers wrongfully terminated, immigrants targeted by toxic employers, janitorial staff harassed in silence, they all began to speak. And they pointed to Tasha. She stood up to a billionaire. We can stand too. She handled each case with the same calm, laser-focused conviction she had shown the day Richard Bennett screamed at her. And behind the scenes, she personally reviewed every submission to ensure no one was overlooked just because their story wasn't headline-worthy. Her own name had become synonymous with integrity. Major law schools cited her case. Harvard Business Review ran a cover story, "The Cleaner Who Cleaned Up Corporate Corruption." But none of that changed the woman at the center of it all. Tasha still took the subway. She still cooked her own meals. Still called her mother in Atlanta every Sunday night to check on her prescriptions. But now she did it all with purpose. With fire. And while the world lifted her name, Richard Bennett's continued to plummet into obscurity. His once lavish penthouse had been sold to cover legal costs. His wife had finalized the divorce and taken primary custody of Tyler, who now lived quietly in Connecticut with her and her parents. Richard was seen occasionally in coffee shops, gray stubble replacing his sleek jawline, head bowed not in shame, he was too proud for that, but in the stunned numbness of a man who had lost everything and had no one to blame but himself. His days were quiet now. His phone no longer buzzed with opportunities. Only reminders, late payment notices, court fees, tax deadlines. And sometimes, though he would never admit it, he watched clips of Tasha on TV. He didn't hate her. Not anymore. In truth, he barely recognized the man who had tried to destroy her. She had become something he never imagined, untouchable. And that fact haunted him. Then, one morning, a delivery arrived at his modest new apartment, a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a copy of Forbes. On the cover, Tasha stood confidently in a navy blue blazer, the gold-lettered headline bold and clear. From Maid to Movement, How Tasha Miller is Rewriting the Rules of Justice in Corporate America. He stared at it for a long time, unable to look away. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter. That magazines lied. That movements faded. But deep down, a quiet truth clawed at him: she had done what he never could. She had turned pain into power. Later that same day, across town, Tasha stood before an auditorium full of students at Columbia University. Her words were calm, but carried the kind of quiet gravity that made listeners lean in and hold their breath. I never wanted to be a symbol. I didn't stand up because I knew what would come. I stood because I had to. Because silence is comfortable for the one in power. But for the rest of us, it's a sentence. A student raised her hand. Ms. Miller, if you could say one thing to Richard Bennett now, what would it be? The room fell silent. Tasha didn't flinch. I'd say thank you. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. She smiled faintly, then continued. Not because he was right. Not because what he did was okay. But because sometimes, the greatest gifts come wrapped in cruelty. He didn't just accuse me, he awakened me. And once I remembered who I really was, I could never be silenced again. The room erupted into applause. In that moment, Tasha knew something profound. What had started as a fight for her name had become a legacy. A blueprint for others. And while Richard faded, she would rise. Again and again. Months passed, then a year. Tasha's story had evolved from scandal to legend, retold in podcasts, university lectures, corporate ethics training, and even high school classrooms. What she had lived through became a landmark case in the fight against racial discrimination and abuse of power in modern America. But she remained grounded, focused not on the fame, but on the fight still ahead. Rise Above had grown from a small legal team to a national organization with chapters in 12 states. They had helped over 200 workers sue for wrongful termination, workplace harassment, and systemic bias. More importantly, they had won, over and over again. But Tasha didn't do it for the wins. She did it for the letters. Each morning, a stack arrived at her desk: handwritten notes, emails printed out by her assistant, even crayon drawings from children whose parents had been helped by the foundation. You made my mommy brave. Because of you, I told my teacher what happened. My boss apologized. And this time, he meant it. That was the real reward. And yet, no letter struck her heart deeper than the one that arrived on a quiet Thursday morning. It came in a small blue envelope. No return address. The handwriting was neat, simple. She opened it slowly. Dear Miss Tasha. My name is Tyler. I'm 9 now. My mom said I could write to you. I saw your name in a book at school and asked her if you were the same Miss Tasha who helped me when I was a baby. She told me everything. I don't remember that day, but I remember feeling safe with you. I just want to say thank you. You didn't have to help me, but you did. And even though my dad and I don't talk much now, I know he reads about you too. He doesn't say it, but I think he knows he messed up. I want to grow up to help people like you do. Your friend, Tyler. Tasha sat motionless for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. All the lawsuits, all the headlines, all the scars, it had all led to this. A boy who had once screamed in her arms now wrote to her with grace, clarity, and kindness. He'd grown into the very opposite of the man his father once was. And in that moment, Tasha realized she hadn't just helped fix a broken system, she'd helped shape a better generation. Later that evening, she stood at the rooftop of the Rise Above headquarters. The city lights shimmered below her like a mirror of everything she had survived, bright, chaotic, and unrelenting. She looked out into the skyline and let the quiet settle over her. Not long ago, she was scrubbing floors in that same city, accused, humiliated, discarded. Now, she was leading a revolution. Her voice, once dismissed as insignificant, now carried weight that echoed far beyond the walls of any boardroom. And as the wind swept across the rooftop, Tasha whispered the words she'd waited years to believe fully. I am not what they said I was. I am who I always knew I could be. Because power built on fear always falls. But power rooted in truth, that changes the world. Some people believe wealth makes them untouchable. That their title, their name, or their bank account entitles them to judge, to demean, to destroy. But in this story, one woman stood against that lie. Tasha Miller proved that dignity isn't granted, it's unshakable. That courage isn't loud, it's persistent. And that when the truth finally speaks, no amount of money can silence it. True power is when you can hold your head high after they tried to bury you, and you walk out stronger than ever. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to True Echo for more real, emotional, and powerful stories that matter. Tell us in the comments, have you ever stood up for yourself when no one believed you? We're listening. And your story matters.